Welcome to the library. Thank you for coming out tonight. This presentation will be filmed by Waycam, so you can catch it on their channel at a later time or share it with your friends on YouTube, and you might see the back of your head, so that's just a warning. Tonight we are excited to have Bob Began back here to share with us the story of the USS Indianapolis, the worst sea disaster in U.S. naval history. Bob grew up in Maine, graduated from Babson, and served 2 years in the Army. He had a 35-year career in the paper and film industry. Now retired, Bob greatly enjoys researching and teaching popular topics in history. His major focus is on naval history, especially the Pacific theater in World War II. So thank you to Bob for coming tonight, and please join me in welcoming him back to the library.
Thank you, Courtney. It's great to be back here. So, this is a very, very hard story. The more you know about this, the more you scratch your head and say, how the hell could this happen? And, you know, the thing that amazes me is 2 weeks after the day she sank, the war was over. And it's just mind-boggling to me. All right, USS Indianapolis, launched in 1931, commissioned in 1932 at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, cost the government about $11 million. For that money, they got a ship 610 feet long, that's 2 football fields long, 66-foot beam, and she displaced about 11,800 tons. Her main armament, these 8-inch guns, she had 2 turrets with 3 per turret forward and 1 turret after. Those, she could fire a projection, a shell about 18 miles. She also had 5-inch guns, which would be mounted on both sides, and these were for anti-aircraft protection. She had 8 boilers. She could go 32 knots, which is a pretty respectable speed for a ship in those days. When she was commissioned, her crew consisted of 906 men and 46 officers. She also had some extra space in this area here, which could accommodate admirals, an admiral and his staff, high-ranking officers who might be in command of a whole fleet or a number of ships. As such, this was one of her frequent guests, Franklin Roosevelt. He always, he loved the Indianapolis. He would use her to show the flag. He was a Navy man himself anyway. Roosevelt loved her. Peacetime, 1932, 35, 38. At that time, America's still working her way out of the Depression. And if you're a young man in Topeka or Birmingham or anywhere in the country, you know, jobs are still pretty scarce. Not a lot of hiring going on. But if you see these Navy posters, the recruiting poster, and it says, join the Navy, see the world, that has a lot of appeal to young men. You learn a trade. This sounds unbelievable now, but you get 3 meals a day, and you got a place to stay, and you got clothing. And you're going to go to places that ordinarily you'd never go to in your life. You're going to go around the world. She's your home. You've got a baseball team, a boxing team, you've got ice cream, you've got movies. This is a really good chance for a young man to get ahead, to accomplish something, to be somebody. And all of this is dwarfed by the fact that at the same time, you're serving your country. So she had a crew all over the country, very, very representative of America. And she's mostly her duty stations are mostly in the Atlantic, North Atlantic, South Atlantic. She does do some Pacific tours, but basically she's earmarked for the Atlantic. The war is coming, the war comes along, and the whole world changes. Here's a picture of her taken from above. These are her guns. Her anti-aircraft guns are in here. This is her aft turret. She also has catapults here. She can carry 5 planes, scout planes, and they're basically shot off the catapult. They fly ahead, look for the enemy. They would guide the gunfire. They would do rescue work if needed. This is really before radar. Radar's on the planning board, but it's nowhere near the capability that it will be. She also has a bunch of lifeboats in here and in here. A lot of wooden lifeboats. Here are the cranes. Oh, by the way, when the planes were launched off, when it came time to retrieve them, they would simply land in the water, taxi alongside of the ship, and they'd actually come up on a canvas sling. And the sling, they'd get on the sling, they'd hoist the sling, and then voila, they're stored away. Here are the boats over here too. I mentioned these lifeboats and wooden boats. Naval architects before the war, say the 20s, the 30s, they were almost obsessed with a lot of lifeboats. The captain's boat, the lifeboats, a bunch of them. Well, one thing we learned rather quickly and rather harshly once the war broke out was that these boats are flammable. And we lost a lot of ships, not because they lost watertight integrity, but because the fires were getting out of control. And so the Navy said, okay, we're going to do what we can to make these less flammable. They got rid of the bulk of the wooden lifeboats. They issued life jackets. They beefed up the number of life rafts and everything. But it was part of the lessons of the early part of the war. So she is in the Pacific, 1941, 1942, 43, and 44. And we're now, it's July 1945. She's been in every major campaign. The Marianas, Saipan, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, the Marshall Islands, the Aleutians. She was considered a very, very lucky ship. She hadn't lost a man all that time until March 31st, 1945. A Japanese plane dropped a bomb. The bomb hit aft in the stern and went through 2 decks before exploding. It killed 9 men. It damaged a couple of the propeller shafts and her fuel tanks. So she had to leave the Pacific to go back to the Navy Yard on the West Coast in San Francisco for repairs. So she's taken out of the combat mode. Here she is. This is the last picture of it taken that I have in peacetime. Painted light gray, a handsome-looking ship. Very, very, she's got a clipper-like bow. She's fast. Crew is totally manning the rail. But it's a 1945. Now, every time a ship would go into a Navy yard to be repaired or to be refit, she would, whatever the changes and modifications were to the ship, they would always be documented in photographs. For example, they'd have a circle around this site right here, and what this shows is extra anti-aircraft guns. And then all up here on the communications section of the radar, there are different circles indicating the changes, because the Navy realizes you need more radar, you need more anti-aircraft guns, you need more communication equipment. So they would, you can't see it here, but they'd have a list, item 1, item 2, item 3. So she's in San Francisco, and she's getting these repairs done prior to her being sent back out to the war. Here's another cruiser, the same situation. She's in for renovations. This is radar jamming device. This is communication. These are the life rafts. You can't see them, but right here, they're on the side of the gun turrets. They're on the side of the ship. They're everywhere because they're replacing the wooden lifeboats. Captain Charles V. McVay, commanding officer, Annapolis. Well respected. His father was an admiral, comes from a long Navy family. He's the good guy, not the worst guy in the bunch, not the toughest guy, but he's a good commanding officer. It's July 45. She's finishing up her refit. They were actually, a lot of the men are actually thinking, you know what, this thing might be over soon. We might not have to go back. I mean, that was a real hope amongst a lot of the crew. Well, that is dashed. July the 12th, McVay learns that he is to take his ship on an ultra top secret mission. Going to take a secret cargo that nobody is to know anything about. The cargo is to be guarded 24 hours a day, 2 men on guard. Nobody has to have access to it. If the ship sinks, the cargo is to have top priority, including over some men to be saved. Well, the cargo turns out to be the atomic bomb. She's going to deliver the atomic bomb to an island base, Tinian, Tinian was an island in the Marianas, a small island, and it was a huge, huge base. Truman makes the decision to use the atomic bomb in March or April because American forces are getting closer and closer and closer to the homeland. They're bombing it on a regular basis. In March of 45, 300 B-29s launched low-level bombing raids over major cities in Japan. They started the biggest fire in the history of the world. 83,000 people were killed. As many as 1 million people were left homeless. This was Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. The bombing raids continued. Still no sign of Japan coming to the table. So, based upon the results of the testing in New Mexico with the A-bomb and everything, he authorizes the use of the bomb. So the Indianapolis is going to take her on a top secret mission. These are just the officers. This is all the commissioned officers on board the Indianapolis prior to her sailing. Just want to show you some. These are real people. This is Lieutenant Commander Lewis Haynes. He's a doctor, senior medical officer on the ship. Here is Commander Haynes this is the executive officer, and then this was officer of the deck. I forget his term, but they're on break. This is a R&R place before they head out on this mission. This is Lieutenant Edward Redmayne, junior officer, engineering officer. Here they are. There's Dr. Haynes on the end, and these are all warrant officers. Not jumping ahead, but he will survive, and he will survive. The rest of all these men are lost. Admiral Spruance, he would use the Indianapolis as his flagship for a while. This is Ernest King. Ernest King was the chief of the United States Naval Operations. In the hierarchy, in the food chain of the United States Navy during World War II, he was the absolute top. And he did not suffer fools lightly. He expected anything he ordered to be carried out immediately. And he was just a hard guy. But he was also very, very effective. This is Admiral Nimitz. And this is some insignificant Army general hitching a ride. Here she is. She's in action. This is 1944. firing her main guns. Here's a splash and a splash over here from enemy guns that show you how close it was. She saw a lot of combat. And here's the bomb. Nobody knows what it is. She leaves, she takes her on board, puts the bomb on, and she heads for the Pacific. She will go from San Francisco to Diamond Head, Hawaii, Honolulu, in 70 and a half hours. She will set a speed record that still has not been broken. The crew is lining the rails and they see Diamond Head and they're thinking, perfect, we're going to have a few days, maybe a week, leave. No. Everybody's grounded on the ship. She spends 6 hours there, takes on more fuel and more provisions. And she heads for the island of Tinian. The Pacific was such a vast area that it was broken up into different commands, certain geographical areas, and you probably can't see it this well, but over here are the Philippines. Here's the Philippine Sea. Over here are the Mariana Islands. Here's Iwo Jima. Here's Palau. And what happened is this was the Mariana Island Command. So any naval activity in this command, in this area, would be under this command would be monitoring it. And then if the ship enters this zone, the Philippine Sea Command. So you're shifting from one jurisdiction to another. But it was such a huge area that there were always different commands monitoring things, number one. Number two, the scope of the American Navy was unbelievable. There were so many ships coming and going, warships, supply ships, troop ships. So it was a very, very complicated business watching. Where is this ship? When is this ship? And, when is she leaving? When is she due? So the Philippine Sea is this little area, the Mariana Islands is right here. It's a little small section of it. But it's Guam, and then there's another island, Rota, and then there's Tinian, and then there's Saipan. Tinian is where the bombers are that take off and bomb the Japanese. We'll come back to that concept of geography. But now, so she leaves July 23rd. There's some communication that's going to happen between the time she gets to Tinian and the time of her sinking. July 23rd, Indianapolis is en route to Tinian. A top secret ultra message goes out to 11 different Pacific commands, similar to what I was showing you. This top secret message details the sightings and the activities of Japanese submarines, including one particular submarine, the I-58, which we'll talk about shortly. It places these submarines in the vicinity of the Caroline Islands and also the Mariana Islands and also the Philippine Sea. Who gets these messages? Ultra top secret. It doesn't go to everybody. It goes to the heads of the various commands. And then the decision is made, well, who needs to know this so that the information filters down. July 23rd. The next day, July 24th, the USS Underhill, this is an American destroyer. She is sunk by a Japanese submarine in this area here. So you got the 23rd, you got the top secret message, said submarines are in the area. The next day, an American destroyer is sunk in this area here. 4 days later, an American merchant ship is headed north, headed up this way, and she sights what she thinks is a periscope, a Japanese periscope. She alerts the Navy. The Navy sends a couple of destroyers. One of them spends 6 hours chasing this submarine. It's verified. It is a submarine. She gets away. The destroyer sends messages stating, pursued a Japanese submarine, got away, such and such a location, such and such a time. July 26th, Indianapolis arrives at Tinian. She unloads the bomb, and her orders say, upon completion and unloading at Tinian, proceed to Guam and report to the port director for routing to Leyte in the Philippines, and get ready for 10 days of training and duty with the task force that is getting ready to invade Japan if they have to. And this is, they anticipated 500,000 American casualties if we have to invade Japan. There were over 1 million troops and civilians ready to resist any kind of American activity. So the Indianapolis drops the bomb off Tinian, and she goes down to Guam to get her her orders. It's basically, they're going to dispatch her. They're going to tell her what route to take, when, da-da-da-da-da. Messages indicate she's no longer in Tinian, she's headed to Guam. July 27th, she drops anchor in Guam. Captain McVeigh goes to the routing officer, who is a guy named Commander James Carter. He needs to get his orders, his itinerary, his routing to go to the Philippines. Now, McVeigh hasn't been in combat in a while. And he says to Carter, what's going on at the frontier? Fill me in, I don't know what's going on. Carter goes, things are very quiet, really, there's nothing. The Japs are on their last leg, there's really nothing to worry about. Carter doesn't mention the Underhill sinking. He doesn't mention the ultra-top secret communiques. He doesn't mention the sighting of a possible Japanese submarine. So you got these flags going up, but it's nothing to worry about. So McVeigh says, well, can I have an escort? I don't want to travel alone. And Carter goes, no. He says, we haven't got any. All the destroyers we had are basically either getting ready for the invasion, or a lot of them were damaged in Okinawa. So you got to go alone, but not to worry. There's nothing going on. There's no problem. The American Navy had an insatiate appetite for fuel. To keep this fleet going and coming, tankers by the hundreds were always there. And in an attempt to reduce the fuel consumption or to save on fuel, there was a policy that said if your ship is not traveling in a dangerous area or a risky area, you cannot exceed 16 knots. Actually, it was 17 knots. You cannot go faster than 17 knots. They work out his speed. It's going to be 15.7 knots. They give him the route he's going to take, which is basically, it's called Route Petty. And from Guam, he's going to go all the way over here to Leyte. It's almost like west-southwest, a perfect straight line, 1,150 miles. He should arrive at 8 a.m. on July 31st. And again, he says, are you sure things are quiet? Yeah, nothing to worry about. His orders say that sometime on July 30th, he'll cross one command zone into another command zone. So they'll drop him off when he's in that zone. They'll pick him up. Going to be tracking him. 9 o'clock in the morning, July 28th, she weighs anchor, and she's headed for Guam. A message goes from Guam to the Philippines saying she should arrive July 31st, 8 a.m. The same day she's leaving Guam, another ship starts her patrol. And it is a Japanese submarine. One of these submarines here. This class of submarines, Japanese submarines, were a little bit bigger than a typical American sub. She's built in 1944. 355 feet long. She carries 6 torpedo tubes forward and aft. And she also carries on the surface 6 human torpedoes that are driven by 1 or 2-man crew. And they can be launched from the top of the submarine. And these are called Kaitens, K-A-I-T-E-N. The word Kaitin comes from the Chinese, and it means revolving the heavens. Well, the Japanese took Kaitin and they translated it into turning the tide. This is going to stop the American barbarians. This is going to turn away the enemy. This is going to bring glory to the emperor. This is her commander. He's 36 years old. His name is Lieutenant Commander Matsusura Hashimoto, career officer. Trains his crew constantly, well respected by the men. Japan's glory days in the Pacific, 1941 to 1942, they're done. They're over. Japan has had very, very little to be happy about in terms of naval performance in 43 and 44. All he wants to do is engage the Americans. All he wants to do is bring glory to the emperor and him and his ship. And he's been waiting a long time for this opportunity. The same day Indianapolis leaves Guam, he's leaving a naval base in Kure. These are the Japanese torpedoes. If Japan did one thing right in terms of naval tactics and naval technology, this is it. Japanese torpedoes were absolutely flawless in terms of their performance, in terms of their reliability, in terms of their design. The American torpedoes the first year and a half were terrible. The Japanese placed a huge amount of emphasis on torpedoes, not only from submarines, but also to be launched from surface ships. And they were highly, highly effective. The American Navy doctrine was, you know what, using torpedoes from a surface ship, it's really not going to work. You got to get so close to the enemy but to have them work effectively that you're going to be within gunfire range. So the American Navy never put much emphasis on surface torpedoes. The Japanese Navy did on surface torpedoes and as well as submarines. This is 23 and a half feet long. It weighs 3,600 pounds. In the warhead, you've got between 890 and 1,200 pounds of explosives. She's powered by oxygen. She doesn't leave a wake. They have extremely accurate guidance systems, and they're fast. So the I-58 is carrying a number of these torpedoes. Go back to the map here. Okay, July 28th, as I said, she's on her way to the Philippines. 15.7 knots. Going to arrive at 11 a.m. on the 31st. July 29th, she sights an LST headed north. This is like a landing ship tank, an American, not a combatant ship per se, but she's headed north. They send a signal, blinkers, but that will be the last American ship she will see. It's on the 29th. It's 6 o'clock. The seas are turning choppy, rough. Visibility's fair. Officer of the day, was Lieutenant J.G. Charles McKissick. He's got a metal clipboard, and he's reading various messages. And one of the messages he's reading is the message of the Japanese submarine that got away. And that message says that the submarine was within an area. She would be 75 miles south of the Indianapolis's route. So she's in that area. Well, he reads this note in the wardroom, and everybody's relatively good-natured. And they make reference to a Japanese sub intercepting us about midnight. I mean, this is amazing to me. They're joking about a submarine that might intercept them about midnight. The remark is, oh, well, our destroyers will take care of that. It's now 8 o'clock. Visibility's deteriorating. Rough seas, long swells, low, heavy clouds, occasional glimpse of the moon. For the most part, the moon's hidden. Captain McVeigh issues the order to cease zigzagging. Below decks, the temperature below decks is well above 95 degrees. The engine room temperature is 120 degrees. She was not built for service in the tropics. A lot of hatches, a lot of doors are left open, just trying to let the heat escape. Topside is full of men with a blanket or a pillow trying to grab some sleep topside to get away from the heat. They figured that probably 300 men doing this. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody's asleep on the watch, because there were at least 28 men on lookout duty. So it was a practice that was condoned in hot weather if you're not in a danger zone. 11 o'clock that night, McVeigh retires to his cabin. He leaves orders for the officer of the day: wake me if there's any changes in the weather or the sea conditions. 11 o'clock. On board the I-58, Hashimoto raises his periscope. He's looking for a target. Doesn't see anything. He surfaces to get a better view. Suddenly, they spot a ship about 6 miles distant. She dives at once. He plots the speed of this vessel. She is approaching at about 12, 13 knots. She's about 1,500 yards away. He orders 6 torpedoes ready for firing, sets the depth 13 feet, sets the speed at 48 knots. I mean, these are like missiles underwater. A little after midnight, 27 minutes after he sighted her, he gives the order to fire. It takes less than 1 minute for the first torpedo to hit the target. At 12:05, the first torpedo hits forward on the starboard side, just below the 20 millimeter in the aircraft guns. She blows about 65 feet off the bow. The bow is now ripped aside. In this area, from here to here, this is the first torpedo, a fire breaks out immediately, because in this area is 3,500 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel are stored in that area. Immediately, a raging fire. Anybody here is killed immediately. Anybody from here to here is killed, but it takes a little bit of time. There's smoke, there's poisonous gas, there's water racing in, and there's no power. There's no lights. And everybody's trying to head here, or trying to get up topside. how the torpedo was designed to work was it hits. The initial explosion blows a huge hole out of it distorts the ship's hull like this. And then seconds later is another explosion which puts a huge downward thrust, and it drives everything downward. Well, that's only a couple seconds, and then the water surges back up, and it really is devastating when it fills this crater. The second torpedo strikes a few seconds after the first, and it hits about here. Immediately, flooding takes place on the main deck and the second deck. All communications are lost. In the engine room number 1, the generators quit. No power, no lights, no communication. The steam pressure drops from 300 pounds per square inch to 75 pounds per square inch. Anybody in the fire room, in the first boiler room, is killed immediately. Basically, they're parboiled because of that pressure. Radio 1 and radio 2. The radio rooms, there's one over here, and then there's radio 2 over here. They're damaged. It's total chaos. McVeigh at first thinks, well, we might be okay. We might be able to control the list and everything. After a few moments, he realizes, no, there's nothing we can do. Get ready. Doesn't issue the order immediately, but get ready to abandon ship. He sends runners throughout the ship to try to get an assessment because there's no communications. And all along, number 1, she's still moving slowly. Number 2, you've got men all along the side of her that are getting ready to abandon ship. She's listening to starboard. The engineering officer says, I'm going to dump this excess fuel because maybe that'll help stabilize the list. That's a huge mistake because that fuel, which is like a thick tar-like substance, it actually had to be heated before it could be burned, is now dumped into the starboard side, which is exactly where the men are jumping into. And if you come in contact, it's like goo, it's like tar sticking to you. In less than 12 minutes after being hit, the ship will roll over to starboard, and with her stern raised high, she will sink in some of the deepest waters in the world, the Marianas Trench. This is a painting done by a French artist. I think it was either Delacroix or Géricault. And it's the wreck of the Medusa. And I wanted to show this painting just to try to convey the range of emotions on people waiting to be rescued. And you have some who have died, you have some who have given up, you have some who are still hoping to be rescued. And I thought maybe that might convey a little bit of the background, if you will. Well, another idea I had was I want to quote from one of the books that's on the table there. It's from a book called In Harm's Way. The author is Doug Stanton. And he's talking about what it was like in the water. There were no birds in the sky, no wind, only the lapping of the noxious stew of seawater and fuel oil against Kapok life vests. There were no stars, just the occasional flash of a crescent moon like a needle of bone threading its way through a flying curtain of cloud. At times, the exhausted boys floated in complete darkness, unable to discern any horizon at all, the sea rising and falling in heavy swells. At other moments, the boys were lit by a ghostly silver light. The living prayed out loud while the dying screamed. Depending on where you went overboard and when, that would decide which group you were in, or if you were singular. As the ship was still moving forward, men were abandoning over a period of 10 minutes. Those in the water were in the life rafts, floater nets, life preservers, or in many cases with nothing at all on. Some men just went overboard with nothing. If there was one thing that was fortunate about this whole debacle, it was that the Indianapolis had twice the number of life jackets she would ordinarily need due to a supply requisitioning error. So there were life jackets, and there were life rafts, 2 on this church, 2 on the side of it. They were everywhere. And in here, it's like a tub, is a net that would float on the water. They were called floater nets, and basically, they would be something you could ride. They weren't very effective, but it was something that would help you in the water. You can see there's a couple of barrels. They had rudimentary supplies, survival supplies, but primitive. Now here is a raft. They had a platform deck. Now also very, very important, they had these ropes on the side that you could hang on to. Again, another close-up of the raft. You're back to that. A fear you didn't want to be separated from the group. You had to try to stay together. They estimate that some groups had as many as 400 men in them, mostly swimmers. They figured 200 men were in rafts and floater nets. And then there were some rafts that had only 3 or 4 men. They tried to stay together. They would tie ropes to each other. The currents were significant. By the time they were rescued, Captain McVeigh, the group he was in, they would have drifted 124 miles during the 96 hours they were in the water. Survivors are facing numerous life-threatening challenges, all of which will become more and more lethal. At the beginning, there was a shred of hope. They must know we're missing. I mean, it won't be too long now. I mean, how the hell? They'll pick us up in the morning. Nobody knows for sure if an SOS got off or if it didn't get off. They tried, but the equipment was in such shambles that, but the assumption was it got off. As the days wore on, hope of rescue is diminishing. Hope is replaced by dehydration, exposure, hypothermia, dementia, a complete breakdown of rank and discipline, and a primal enemy, sharks. There were also countless scenes of men trying to aid or trying to encourage their buddies, even though there was absolutely little they could do. You know, you'd say, hey, we're going to be okay. Don't give up. They'll find us. Hang in there. But that's all you could do would be to speak. Chaplains were swimming around trying to buoy men. Everybody was trying to keep people's spirits up. Monday morning, the sharks began to appear. They've been trailing many of the groups for almost a full day. Sharks were oceanic whitetips, a common ship-following type, and considered very, very dangerous. At the beginning, they would just go after the dead bodies that were either floating or sinking below. As time passed, they started to follow groups and attack men either swimming or clinging to the floater nets. Some men were able to fight off the sharks. Some men said, no, you got to be still, be perfectly still, don't move. In some cases, one approach worked, in another case, the other approach worked. They figure at an absolute rock bottom minimum, over 200 men were killed by the sharks. Exposure is taking its toll. The daytime temperature, 100 degrees. At night, it drops to the mid-80s. Causes the body temperature to drop significantly, leads to hypothermia. That brings on hypoxia, with the end result being amnesia and a general mental stupor. This loss of judgment spurs hallucinations and mirages. They started seeing illusions like, there's an island over there. It's maybe a half a mile. Yeah, there's a hotel on it. Or, you know, you can drink the water. Just don't drink the water from the top. If you reach down a little bit, it's okay. You know, you can go without food X days. You can go without water Y days. But the body needs to sleep. You can't go without sleep as long as the other two variables. And these guys are just petrified of falling asleep. And some of them have open wounds. Some of them they're dehydrated. They've been throwing up the tar and everything. It's just terrible. On some of the rafts, this part of the story is documented in the newest book on the table there by these two women. There were men who were going berserk. A lot of sailors would have knives. That was part of their job. You'd have a knife with a blade about that long. And some of the men on these rafts would look at their buddy and say, he's a Jap, or he's trying to kill me. And they would attack and kill these men. Well, a bunch of men got together and they made a pact. And they said, listen, if we see somebody who is threatening an innocent man, and we think that he's going to try to kill that man, we will kill him. And how we will do it, we'll get him in a headlock and we'll stick a knife under his armpit. They took a vow never to say who they killed and never to say who did the killing. The memory would be just enough to haunt them. As the days went on, the men reacted in different ways. Some resorted to praying aloud. Some made promises to God. Hey, if you get me out of here, God, I will be good. I will lead a good life. Others focused on memories back at the farm. Home-cooked pies, sweethearts that were waiting for them, an old jalopy that they wanted to drive. I mean, after all, the war is just about over. We're going to be out of here. We'll be rescued. You still tried to encourage your buddies. But there was nothing you could do. The gunnery officer, his name was Lipsky, he swims up to a guy, to the medical officer, Lieutenant Commander Haynes. He says, Lou, I'm dying. Tell my wife I love her. And he sinks to the bottom. Another guy, his name is Cozell Smith, Arkansas. Shark bites him in the left hand. He's struggling. And he jabs his finger into the shark's face, and it actually hits the eye, and the shark releases him. But you never know. You never know what the hell's going to work. You don't know. And you're drifting, and there's no sign of hope. Well, I'll go back to this one more. We do know that they were rescued. Okay, so the question is, how the hell did that happen? And this is a one in a million story. This is a PB-1 Ventura plane. It's a reconnaissance plane. They would make routine flights from the island that they were stationed on, and they would fly over Japanese-occupied islands to see if the islands were resupplied or if they were evacuated. Basically, humdrum duty. They'd fly at 10,000 feet and primarily use radar. There wasn't a lot of this looking down at the water. Well, the Pacific is so big that to transmit radio messages, you needed a mega powerful antenna. And some genius in the Pentagon came up with, let's have a cable run out of the back of the plane 50 yards, and at the back of the cable will be a little antenna, and as you're flying along, that gives you more capability to transmit over these huge distances. So that's what they do. They get up 10,000 feet, let the cable out, fly along. Well, this one day, the problem was that sometimes the thingamajig at the end of the cable comes loose, and it's flip-flopping, and so they have to pull the cable back in. They got the bomb bay doors opening, and they're pulling the cable back in, and the pilot says, okay, we'll get out to 5,000 feet so you can see better what you're doing. And they've got the cable in, and they've almost got it reeled in, and one of the guys looks down, and he sees something on the water, and he goes, what the hell is that? Doesn't look right. It looks like an oil slick. It looks like a big shiny sheen on the surface. So they don't know, so they drop down to 1,000 feet. And now they're saying, yeah, there must have been a ship sunk here. But nobody knows about any ship sunk there. Must have been a Japanese ship. And so they get down to about 150 feet, and the guy looks and he says, wait a minute, there's somebody in the water, and they see a head in the water. And they drop down 50 feet, and they're flying around, and they see 5 guys. And then they see a total of 30 guys. And then they realize there's men in the water, and they're Americans. At first, they thought they were Japanese. At 11:25, they send a message to the island of Peleliu. A couple minutes later, they sent a second message saying there's 150 men in the water. So that's the plane that spots them at first. This is the pilot. Cool guy. Actually, this plane is the one that this guy was flying, and then this guy was flying the first plane. So this is a Catalina. As soon as they get word that the men are in the water, they load her up with water, with rafts, with everything possible, and they head for the site. He gets there. He takes off at 12:40. At first, the messages coming in, the reaction was skepticism, because nobody wants to believe the scope of the disaster is this large. But the more news coming in, the more they realize this is a major problem. They start to send ships. They dispatch destroyers to head to the same scene. They estimate the oil slick that they looked at, 10 miles long, about 5 miles wide, had at least 150 men in it. He will take this plane and he will land it in the water. That's against regulations. There's 10-foot seas, strong winds. This is not a good idea. He says, I'm going to land. He lands his plane, and the plane basically weaves her way through different groups, and they focus on picking up stragglers, on picking up swimmers. People in the rafts, they leave because they're not the immediate danger. They will pick up 51 men. They will have them tied to the wings because there's no room in the plane. They're lashed down with parachute cords. Some of the men in the water are delirious. They don't want to be rescued. They're cooked. They're toast. They're hauled in. Other men in the water are furious because they don't think they're going to get picked up. All in all, you're going to have 7 ships en route. The PBY lands at about 4:30. He decides to land. When he does land, there's 12-foot swells, the wind's at 8 knots. He brings the plane down. The first landing, she bounces up about 15 feet. The second bounce is maybe 5 feet, and the third bounce is just popping a few rivets. So you got water streaming in, but nothing. I mean, they're going very, very slowly. They've got 51 men on board. Marks, the pilot, is afraid. He's going to run over people. Here's another PBY that will land. He only rescues one, but here's a picture of men on a raft. And look at the seas. I mean, the seas are just, this is not a quiet day at the beach. You've got ships coming. These are the survivors are finally rescued. What happened is, when the word reaches these various destroyers, one of the captains of a destroyer says, "That's it, we're going." He doesn't wait for orders. Doesn't wait for orders, and he says, "That's it, we're leaving." And he charges ahead. By the time he gets his orders, it's like to go, it's 2 hours later. Well, that 2 hours is critical in the fact of some of the lives he saves. Another ship is headed that way, and the captain says, "All ahead full." And they're going at top speed, and the engineering officer says, "Captain, you got to slow down. You're going to blow the engines." And the engine says, captain goes, "No, to hell with it. If we blow them, we blow them." So the ships are getting there at night, and one of the destroyers raises, she has two spotlights. She has one spotlight pointed perfectly up straight ahead so that the men can see it in the water. And another spotlight is forward. Things like that. These are all against orders, but that's people taking the initiative. There's one ship, and the captain was a civilian. He was a merchant marine guy, and he had a commission, and he was not a terribly good guy. So it was the Bassett. I have a picture of it. And so they've got boats, and they're in the water, and they're picking up men. It's dark, and the seas are picking up. And one of the men on the ship is standing there, and he sees a shark right on the side of the ship. And he goes, "Look at that shark." Well, the captain hears this. Shark was also slang for a torpedo. And the captain hears this, and he thinks, "That's it. Sub's in the area. We're getting out of here." He says, "Bring in the boats." And one of the junior officers says, "No, we're not leaving." And he says, "I'm the captain. We are leaving." Another junior officer, the two of them lock him to his cabin. They lock him up in his cabin. There was never any discipline taken against him. That ship rescued more men than any other ship. They rescued like 190 men. Well, this is August 2nd. This is the 3rd. Late in the afternoon on August 3rd, the rescue operation is now shifted to retrieval of the bodies. They had logs that they maintained, and on board the USS French, her logbook read, "Body number 20, no identification, body badly mutilated. Body number 22, no identification, rings or watch, body decomposed." They had a total of 91 bodies that they picked up. They would bury all 91 bodies. They would get a piece of canvas, put the remains on the canvas, take 3 5-inch shells, tie it up, throw it overboard. These are the survivors. Some of them were so weak they were in litters, stretchers. They're all taken ashore to a hospital, ultimately in Guam. Here's all of the survivors on board an aircraft carrier coming home. These are the ships that rescued them. They had these flat-bottom landing craft, and that allowed them to really pick up a lot of bodies. Here's the Bassett. She saved 151 men. Okay, this is a telegram. It is sent to Lieutenant Commander Haynes's wife. A report just received shows your husband, Lieutenant Commander Lewis Levitt Haynes, U.S. Navy, has been wounded in action 30 July 1945. Diagnosis, exhaustion from overexposure. Prognosis, good. Your anxiety is appreciated, and you will be furnished details when received. You are assured that he is receiving the best possible medical care, and I join in the wish for his speedy recovery. Communications may be addressed to him at such and such an address. And this line here. In order to prevent possible aid to our enemies, please do not divulge the name of his ship or station unless the general circumstances are made public. these notices of either being wounded in action or missing in action went out to 883 people. All of the survivors are basically secure and told you cannot say anything about this. There's a blackout on it. There were some reporters, they were not allowed to release the details of this. Another document, this is authorizing Commander Haynes, who does survive, to wear the Silver Star, a medal. He survived the war, and he went on to, he had a very, very successful career in medicine. He ended up in the Leahy Clinic in Burlington. And his daughter, so I got a call from Needham, and they said, somebody wants to talk to you about your talk. And okay, all right, whatever. And I call up this lady, and the woman at the Needham Senior Center says, yeah, I think she said her father was on the ship. So, wow, okay. So I call her up and talk for a moment. And she says, you know, my dad was the senior surviving medical officer, and he spent 5 days in the water, and he survived. And I go, your dad was Lieutenant Commander Lewis Haynes. And she goes, well, how did you know that? And I said, well, madam, you know, I do my research. Nicest lady in the world. God love her. So she says, would you like to see some of his memorabilia? And I go, yeah, I'd really love to. And I meet her, and she goes, the best line of all, she goes, I am a direct result of his rescue. I was born 1 year to the day he was rescued. And I go, pretty hard to argue against that logic. But she's just a wonderful lady. Okay, so the bomb is used. Hiroshima. No sign of Japan coming to the table. This bomb is used in Nagasaki. Same situation. This is the Enola Gay that dropped the bomb. Finally, on August the 15th, 1945, Pacific War is ended. MacArthur to rule Japs. This is my hometown newspaper, Lewiston, Maine. Indianapolis sunk with 883 people. This is the first time the Navy acknowledges she's gone. There is a lid on this thing. King is ballistic. This is not what he wants on his watch. This is not what the greatest Navy and the greatest victories in the history of naval warfare. He said, get this thing taken care of. Do what you got to do. He orders a court of inquiry. Court of inquiry basically is this. Find out what happened, why, and who was responsible. So they form a court of inquiry. Some of the members happen to be the commanders of some of the zones of control that the Indianapolis was in. McVeigh becomes a person of interest, which means that he will have access to the testimony. He can cross-examine, and he knows where this is headed. What they try to do, basically, somebody's going to take the fall. Somebody's going to take the hit on this. So King orders the, I hate this. Hold on a second. King orders the court of inquiry. Here's McVeigh. What they find out in this court of inquiry was, you know what? This thing goes way up the scale of different officers. This is not just some novice sailor asleep at the switch. This thing, there's a lot of people that own a piece of this. It's 600 feet long. It's got 1,200 men on it. How does that disappear for 4 or 5 days? One of the people that was testifying in the court of inquiry is a guy, Captain Oliver Naquin, and he was the guy in charge of the routing office in Guam. And they go, did you tell him that there were Japanese submarines? And he goes, no. He says, there really weren't any. It wasn't considered dangerous. And they said, well, did you tell him about the merchant ship or the destroyer? And he goes, no, that was all not related. And so he sticks to his story. It continues until August 20th. And it focuses on two questions. One was, why was she not reported being overdue? And the logic, this is how you get in big organizations, sometimes you get things that don't make sense. There was a policy. The question is, she was 4 days overdue. Why didn't anybody notice it? The answer is, well, from the people in the Philippines, policy number, and this is an actual policy, CL 1045 says that you do not need to mention the arrival of non-combatant ships. There are so many ships coming and going. You don't need, if a ship is overdue, you don't have to announce the arrival of it. Other people will be picking that up. It's redundant. And the reasoning is, well, if you don't have to announce the arrival, why would you announce the non-arrival? So it's one of these deals. And the logic was pretty murky. A lot of answers were, well, yeah, we dropped her from our rolls. They should have picked her up. Well, you never told us where she was, so we didn't, And it goes on and on. So the government they really want to get this thing taken care of, and they're saying, well, it had to be McVeigh's fault. King says, you know what, he had to do something wrong. This can't happen. And so they're trying to pin the blame on him because he wasn't zigzagging, and he didn't get an SOS off. Well, the SOS, nobody knew. That wasn't going to work. The zigzagging part, the Navy put a lot of emphasis on that. So they did something that had never been done before in American military history. They had the captain of the Japanese submarine, Ochasura, flown from Japan to the Washington Naval Yard to testify at McVeigh's court-martial. And in effect, they're saying to him, well, if he was zigzagging, wouldn't it have been harder for you to sink him? When the captain was interviewed in Japan, he very, very clearly stated, no, there was no way I could miss. I could not miss. Zigzag, no zigzagging, he was in my sights. And the Japanese translator translated that quite accurately into the answer that it wouldn't have made any difference. Well, when he's in America and he's asked the same questions, the translator wasn't as lucid. And he ends up saying, well, yeah, maybe in a special, maybe, I guess there's a possibility that if he was zigzagging, we couldn't have sunk him. And the Navy just jumps right on that. They even had an American submarine commander, a highly decorated captain, and they did the same drill with him. If he was zigzagging, wouldn't it have been impossible? No, and the captain says, no, we could have got him either way. But, there was a quote from Napoleon that says, never interrupt your enemy when he's making mistakes. And they basically wore these guys down to the point where basically McVeigh is going to take the fall. He knows that. And he also knows it'll be for the good of the Navy. So he is court-martialed unjustly. This is just one of the chaplains. This is a player card for this chaplain. So his career is over. He retires to Connecticut. And every year around Christmas and the holidays, he'd get these cards and letters, hateful, vitriolic. And they'd say words to the effect like, well, you're probably having a Merry Christmas, but we can't because you killed our son. And he would keep these letters all together, and he finally took his own life in 1968. Now, there was his crew stood by him, all the survivors stood by him completely. They all knew he was railroaded. And there were many, many efforts to exonerate him and his record. And finally, that took place, I think it was in 2002. The thing, you know, a lot of Navy ships had shipmates associations. I mean, you could go to their reunions and everything. Well, with the Indianapolis Survivors Association, it was really, really well done. And there was a lot of lobbying to clear his name. Ultimately, he was cleared. This is the statue of the chaplain. This is in Waterbury, Connecticut. Here's a model of the plane in the Smithsonian. These are the survivors left. There's probably only, God, maybe 8 or 10 now. I gave this talk in Rhode Island, and one of the people in the audience says, yeah, I lost my great uncle on the ship. And she gave me his name, I verified it. Another person sitting over here says, my uncle was on the ship, my great uncle was on the ship. He says, and he survived, and he's living in Lansing, Michigan, and he's 97. So this story resonates. You know, a lot of people know something because it was such a huge, huge scale of tragedy. Here she is at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. Her bow is missing. Surprisingly little damage because she's down so deep. This is a spare parts container, USS Indianapolis. Here's her anchor, and here's her hull number, 35. Ship's bell. One of her main turrets. 5-inch anti-aircraft gun. Anti-aircraft gun. Part of a plane. Her anchor. And again, another picture of it. And she's at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. A very, very noble ship. The best and the worst of humanity. You know, just deserve a lot of credit. And again, 2 weeks before the end of the war, you know? Oh, she had, 900 men and 80 officers when she was commissioned in 1932. On her last voyage, she had over 1,200 men. Because the more equipment you add, the more the manpower needs. And the more manpower, the more equipment, and the more the stability is affected. So there's a whole bunch of things. But a great story, and I really am honored to be able to tell it. So I will be glad to field any questions, please. Sir?
How deep is that down?
I think it's 35,000 feet. It's the deepest water in the world, the Marianas Trench. Well, they've got this, you know, it's a vessel, Petrel is the name of it, one of these underwater vehicles. Ooh, boy. We're getting, she's getting ready to yank us. A couple more questions? Anybody?
What else have you researched? Do you other type of ship?
Yeah, well, I've got different talks. Mutiny on the Bounty, Race to the South Pole, Lawrence of Arabia. Got a new one working on a woman who was in the Middle East in 1900. Her name was Gertrude Bell. And this woman was unstoppable. She would get on her camel with her party and go into the middle of the desert, go up to the sheikh's tent, sit down, smoke cigarettes, have coffee. She could speak 7 languages. She was a spy for the English in the Middle East. And the thing is, she was pivotal to the first government in Iraq. Faisal was his name. He was king of Iraq, 1920. If you take a newspaper article, January 15th, 2020, and read the headlines and compare it to a headline from January 15th, 1920, nothing's changed. So I'm trying to get her, Courtney, to let me tell the story about her. I guess March is Women's History Month, so anyway. You're a good audience. Thanks for paying attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just add to
Absolutely. Yep.
I've been very blessed, but I've met a lot of beautiful people in my time. One of them was my Uncle Lou, who served on the SS Sullivan,
The destroyer.
the destroyer.
537 USS Sullivan. 537. Fletcher class.
Uncle Lou was the sonar man,
Oh, okay.
and he avoided many of the sub attacks.
Sure.
And he reported to George Mendoza.
He was a.
He was the skipper.
Oh, Mendoza was. Okay.
George Mendoza also was the kissing sailor in Time magazine.
Oh, at the VJ day?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So as I say, I've been very blessed to also videotape an interview with George Mendoza for about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
You know,
Probably about a year before he passed away.
that is, I mean, history like that is going to evaporate.
Oh,
I mean, stories like this, you know.
George
What?
Mendoza, the stories of the cyclones and everything that hit the ship and
Oh, yeah.
reloaded. The USS Sullivan loaded up with diesel fuel would only go 175 miles out into the Pacific. Then it had to be refueled.
Oh, yeah, they were.
So they got out there somewhere in the vicinity you were talking about,
Uh-huh.
and they went to rescue
Thank you.
the survivors of the USS Bunker Hill.
My uncle was on the Bunker Hill.
So he was going down,
Can I get my books?
as the Bunker Hill was going down,
Yeah.
they arrived there, and it was probably about 50 years later at our house at Thanksgiving.
Uh-huh.
My Uncle Lou had just been to the reunion of the SS Sullivan, which is docked in Buffalo, New York.
Yes. Yep.